Historical truths are not negotiable. They're just facts. How we feel about facts or how they are used is a moral responsibility best learned to avoid repeats. Adults should not fear learning the whole truth. It is most difficult for faces like their own to visit the horrible historical truths of ancestors. They feel their pain. Know that it is insulting to them for others to dismiss or minimize history because it is uncomfortable and embarrassing. More recent Americans who teach that the enslaved benefited by learning skills need to reflect on what drove them from home. Learn history before attempting to lead or speak for others. Between 1650 and 1860, approximately 10 to 15 million enslaved people were transported from Western Africa to the Americas. Most were shipped to the West Indies, Central America, and South America. Slaves were hot commodities. Slave auctions were frequent events. A sign advertising a slave auction in Richmond, Virginia on July 22nd, 1823, where 10 enslaved people, including a teenage girl, were to be sold. This one features Negroes and a racehorse sold on the race grounds. An ad announcing the planned auction of nearly 500 enslaved people in Johnson Square in Savannah. Joseph Bryan, a notorious slave trader, ran ads like this one for several weeks ahead of the auction to publicize it. For sale, long cotton and rice Negroes, a gang of 460 Negroes accustomed to the culture of rice and provisions. This is an advertisement for a 2-day auction of enslaved people published on February 8th, 1859. The auction was one of the largest in history. Nearly 500 enslaved people were sold for $303,850, roughly 9.4 million today. Note a group of men working in the rice fields of the Mulberry Plantation in South Carolina in 1916. It appears that not much has changed. 20 years after slavery ended, 1885, children on a Louisiana sugarcane plantation. Survivors of the slave yacht Wanderer. Post slavery name Ward Lee, Tucker Henderson, and Taro Romeo. The Wanderer was a ship used to traffic nearly 500 kidnapped Africans to the United States. An enslaved family on the plantation of Dr. William F. Gaines of Hanover County, Virginia, 1862. I wonder if they all lived in the same small cottage. Meet Leonard Norris, who was among dozens of people enslaved by George Washington Parke Custis, grandson of Martha Washington and step grandson of George Washington, at Arlington House in Virginia. When Mr. Custis passed away, Robert E. Lee, the executor of the estate, took over the house and continued to enslave those living there. Enslaved people working on the Cassina Point plantation belonging to Jane Hopkinson on Edisto Island, South Carolina. Back to the post slavery rice fields. A man ditching rice fields on the mulberry plantation in South Carolina. A black family stands outside the Hermitage plantation in Savannah, Georgia. Here's a family on the Kingsley plantation on Fort George Island in Jacksonville, Florida. Here we see a familiar picture, a postcard published by Harper's Weekly on January 30th, 1864, featuring an enslaved man named Wilson who was around 60 years old. The editors noted that Wilson's former enslaver, a sugar planter in New Orleans named Volsey B. Marmelin, was accustomed to branding his Negroes, and Wilson had on his forehead the letters VBM, his enslaver's initials. Two young enslaved boys, circa 1850. In the center is a slave badge. Enslaved people in Charleston were also hired out to work as unskilled laborers or skilled artisans for business owners, families, and even the city itself. The practice of hiring out was so common that the city of Charleston developed a slave badge system to regulate hired out enslaved people.